country, the U.S. Treasury Department can have jurisdiction over that. So she has gone about working within the U.S. government and with her civil society partners and governments around the world to shut some of these war criminals and their international collaborators out of the international financial system. And it's remarkable the kind of impact you can have. You can, shift the incentives of people who are willing to kill in large numbers for their political or economic objectives. And, I would argue that some of these fairly draconian financial pressure tools have led the South Sudanese parties to the negotiating table, have led the president of Congo, who was going to change the constitution and try to become president for life, to back off and walk away from it. They're small, early signs, but it shows that when governments care around the world and they ally themselves with the people's will on the ground in these countries in Africa that are struggling and pressing, pushing for a cleaner government, for human rights, for peace, we can make a real difference. So I think there are upstanders everywhere. You just have to find them and cultivate them and find a way to make a difference.
I imagine that there's a lot of us here at the Harris School who are hoping to be those individuals in the future. So with that in mind, we often think a lot about what's the traditional path that I can take as a policymaker or as a researcher. But I didn't even realize that department existed, and I probably should have. Are there particular roles that you see as the biggest opportunity for people who are at the early stages of their policy career, that where should they put their focus on, either in the U.S. government or governments elsewhere, local and national levels, to make sure that this change is made?
So my hero in the world, one of my heroes, is a gentleman named Brian Stevenson. He is the executive founder and executive director of Equal Justice Initiative based in Montgomery, Alabama, an amazing civil rights organization that defends people on death row and promotes racial justice. And he talks very eloquently and very passionately about getting proximate to the problems, to the people that you care about, the issues that you believe in. So, if you're interested in some, like the kind of stuff we're talking about today, if you're interested in Africa and you're interested in the human rights issues, go there, spend time there, learn about your mentality, your viewpoints, your sort of worldview will alter in such spectacular ways, like in unpredictable ways, by being in the communities in which. So in other words, there's no shortcut. I think oftentimes I spend a lot of times at universities, and I find a lot of people who just want to go right to Washington and get in a job and make the difference. And I'll just give a minute of my own life. I went worked for the Clinton administration, and I went in there, and my first week on the job, I was ready to quit. I was like, oh my gosh, there's all these people with way better educations than me, and they're so fast. But slowly but surely, because I had spent so much time in the ground in Africa, the National Security Advisor started noticing, and he would ask me, even though it wasn't my role to speak, because I'd be a backbencher at that point, can you come up here and talk about it, because those guys. And then President Clinton noticed it, and he would start sending me, I wasn't even working for the State Department, I was working for the White House, and that wasn't even my job, and he would send me to be part of these incredible peacemaking efforts, because he was personally interested. It was all because I had spent so much time in the field and understood from a visceral point of view, understood from an experiential point of view what these issues were. I had also read a lot, and I had also studied, and I also worked, but what the cream that rose to the top in their estimations was the time on the ground in the places that I cared about and that they cared about. And so I guess when you're, at the earlier part of your careers, when you're just, starting out, trying to figure out what to do, it's really, really hard to map out a 10 or 20 or 30-year plan. It's fun to do, but I guarantee you, if you get out of your comfort zone, go to places that are experiencing the kind of issues that are motivating you, that you care about, and you spend a lot of time there, your mentality, your thought process about what you're going to do in this world is going to evolve in such dramatic ways, because you will learn that you will go into a room and then you'll see there were 7 doors you never even knew about. And you'll go through one of those doors and go, wait a minute, I didn't even know this was possible. So I would strongly urge, when people still have the time, when they're not tied down too much to a family or to a particular place that they have to be in a certain job or whatever, to use this time. Now, you might have to accumulate a little more debt. It might cost a little more. That's no fun. I get it. I'm part of that whole thing. I paid my dues. But 20, 30, 40 years from now, when you look back, you'd be like, oh my gosh, that was that few $1,000s that I had to accrue additional to what I already owed compared to what I learned and what impact it had on my life. And then I think about employers. Now I'm an employer, so I'm hiring people all the time. And, the employers want to see people that don't just follow the crowd. They want to see people who are willing to take a chance, who did something a little different, who has something on their resume that stands out. So while you're still in school, this is the time. There's so many interesting professors here who can help, brainstorm with you about what kind of things you can end up doing in the medium term. Use those. Spend time with those professors. Seek them out. Go to their office hours. Those are your allies, potentially. They are people that can champion your life and your career for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And so don't waste and don't lose the moment, and keep your eyes peeled and open and for all kinds of opportunities and places. Sometimes the prudent thing to do in the summer would be to go get a job and make as much money as you can and, reload for the next semester. But, this is your chance. This is your chance to do something crazy and different, and your life will change. So that's my 2 cents.
I feel like you're speaking directly to me. It seems some days like there's infinite numbers of weak states, fragile states, conflict-affected areas, and that can feel pretty overwhelming. In your work, how do you navigate prioritization of one place versus another when there's so much need?
So we're not so reactive as some, there are wonderful groups that work globally, and they react to the biggest crises in the world, and they surge on those crises. And I have great respect for that model. Our model is completely different. We're focusing, we've said, okay, we're going to sort of ground zero of crisis, where this region of the world, East and Central Africa, by far and away the deadliest war zone in the world since World War II. You combine these countries and you're in the neighborhood of 11 to 12 million people dying of conflict-related causes in the last 25 years. It's just, the numbers are just mind-boggling, and no other place in the world is even close. So we said, let's just focus on this area. Instead of going wide, let's go deep, and let's spend years trying to make a difference in these places. And if we can show that there is a particular model or approach that can actually make a dent in the problem, then we can expand. We'll go to another region of the world or whatever, and that'll be decided by the staff. But right now, our objective is to show or to demonstrate or to see, it's a hypothesis, to see if we can make a difference in a place using this model, which the model being the focus on that kleptocracy, the focus on dismantling the violent kleptocracy by using these policy tools, by working with the banks, by creating massive consequences, financial consequences for the financial crimes that drive these mass atrocities. So that's the idea. It's a little different. We don't chase the latest headlines. We're just staying in, and frankly speaking, there are times when our area of the world has a lot of attention. You mentioned while we were talking beforehand, northern Uganda and the Lord's Resistance Army and Invisible Children, and some of the people in this podcast will know well what we're talking about. Some will have never heard of it. Well, that was like a global cause at one point 10 years ago. And so there was a great deal of demand and interest in the issues that we were working on. Darfur, again, a place that for many will evoke quite harrowing images of genocide, the first genocide of the 21st century. For others, they never heard of it. What is that? Is that a place, a person, what? And, and so that it's a flat line now. No one cares about Darfur. It's gone. So you have to understand that these things, they ebb and flow in terms of interest. And right now, there isn't much interest in the region of the world that I work on. And that isn't going to change our, we're not going to go chase the headlines in Venezuela or Syria or someplace because that's where the energy is. We're going to stay in our little corner of the world and keep working on it and keep deepening our relationships with the civil society groups on the ground in those places and keep working on trying to change policy, keep trying to get attention on these places. And, hopefully over time we can help make a difference.
Yeah, I feel like people have pretty short attention spans, but there's also seemingly this growing intent to be active and aware and intentional with how you're spending your time and using your voice. And I think that I've noticed that with friends of mine who I never thought would care about anything else other than themselves, and who are now caring about global issues, or caring about women's rights, or caring about children's rights. So I'm hopeful that these complex issues that you're working on that are that much harder to understand, especially if you haven't lived it, will eventually be something that many more people are able to work towards, even if it's something that's hard to wrap their minds around now. So
really quickly, the exciting thing about that is the connection between all of us and our phones and laptops. Like, that's just a simple one. Like, the fact that you are, you're in your pocket or wherever it is, you are connected directly to Central Africa, to Congo, because many of the raw materials that are in your phone came from there. And the idea that you as a consumer, whether you're a student or just out of school, as a consumer, you can contact the companies that buy and use these minerals, these raw materials in their products, and then sell to us. Like, that you can tell those folks, it matters to me that you pay attention to the places that you buy that you source your raw materials from. It matters to me as one of your purchases, one of your consumers, that you care about the human life and the environment of the places where you're sourcing your materials. Like, that is a powerful message to these companies when it comes in bulk. And we've been able to help support the organization of a movement led by students that have had a direct impact on some of the biggest companies in the world and their sourcing policies. And so, like, we don't have to think about things that something that happened in the 1960s, like the civil rights movement, to see where change can happen. You can look literally in the last few years, student movements have influenced Apple and many other major companies to completely change the way they do business, in the way they source their supply chain, so that they care and focus on the human dimensions of the people and the communities from which they're getting these materials. And that's a massive difference that made in the lives of millions and millions of people, directly because students cared. That's a powerful thing. And so we'll continue to, even if it's not in the headlines, if people understand and see that they're connected to these places, and a small percentage, but an important percentage of people take action, then a change can be made.
Well, if that's not motivating, I'm not sure what is. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on another episode of UC3P. Big thanks to Lauren Manning for interviewing and Haz Yano for producing, engineering, and editing. Also, we'd like to give a special shout out to the Obama Scholars Program, which brought Mr. Prendergast to Chicago. Before we go, starting in the fall, you're going to hear a lot of changes to this podcast. We don't want to ruin the surprises just yet, but we think you're really going to enjoy them. If you have any suggestions, feel free to tweet them at us. Our handle is @the UC3P. Well, it's that time again. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next Friday.
Hey UC3P listeners, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Nick.
In the United States, public faith in the military remains sky high, while trust in other government institutions sinks to an all-time low.
At the same time, fewer than 1% of Americans will ever serve in the armed forces, and the cultural divide between active duty troops and the civilian population continues to widen.
UC3P presents a new series, Thank You for Your Service, where we take a deep dive into the complex world of civil military affairs.
We'll address the politicization of the military, defense policy in the news, and the importance of staying informed in a democracy.
Join us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as we explore how our professional military institution relates to the society it serves.